Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Monday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 1st of December. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather situation and the forecast. You can easily do that by giving us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska or at arh.noaa.gov. Your marine weather radio or your NOAA weather radio, great ways to listen to the forecast anytime or from your local news media source. You can find us online at Facebook, NWS Alaska, NWS Alaska on Twitter using the hashtag AKwx. And when there's snow or freezing rain, no matter if you're in the bush or if you're in South Central or Southeast, we would love to have that information. Fairbanks, you're going to get some snow here in the next 24 to 36 hours. Send in your snow reports to NWS Fairbanks using the hashtag AKwx. Continues the conversation with other people that may not be following the Weather Service accounts on Twitter. So use those hashtags for sure. On YouTube, follow the NWS Alaska account, and anytime you want to check the latest forecast, you can do that by going to AKwx TV. That's published once a day. And what you see here on Alaska Weather Tonight will be on YouTube later this evening. So if you miss a part of the show, want to go back and watch that, or maybe just sit around and watch it in front of the fireplace with the kids, you can do that anytime. Review past episodes as well. That could get dangerous. That's on youtube.com. And again, search for AKwx TV for Alaska Weather. Here's a look at the hazardous weather situation tonight. Across Southeast, winter weather advisories continue there. The snow slowly winding down. Some places in the south there around Ketchikan and Annette points north saw about 2 to 3 inches. All the way northward toward Juneau saw upwards of 11 to 12 inches of snow. So a good first round of decent snow for the wintertime. Now South Central is getting in on the action. Winter weather advisories are posted for freezing rain at this point across South Central from the Anchorage area all the way down through the Matanuska Valley and the Kenai Peninsula and around to the northern sections of Prince William Sound. There will probably be an increase in freezing rain as we head through the evening hours. And then by tomorrow, chances are that will wind down, but could shift into a brief round of moderate to occasionally heavy snow. And that includes the Anchorage and the Matanuska Valleys there. So we're going to watch for some changeovers there. But on top of some of the snow that's already fallen there, could make some travel situations fairly tricky, no matter if you're on the Sterling or on the Seward Highway or on the Glen. So plan for some extra time driving and plan for some difficult conditions if you're flying into or out of that area, whether it's big planes or small planes. Up across the northern sections, let's take a look at that. Winter storm warnings now all the way from areas north of Hooper Bay through Norton Sound and into the interior and the Yukon Flats. That does include Fairbanks in the middle Tanana Valley. So what's going on here? Well, first of all, freezing rain is going to start up in the west and has probably already begun across some parts of the lower Yukon Valley. We're expecting as much as 1/10 to as much as 3/10 of ice accumulation there on trees and power lines. Especially the power lines will be the big problem there because once you get up to about 1/4 of an inch or so is when you start to have a little too much weight on those power lines. So you might experience some power outages in that case if it gets upwards of 2 to 3/10. So it's going to start in the west and gradually change over to snow. Now once that gets into the interior a little bit more, we're talking about a much better case for moderate to occasionally heavy snow. Snowfall accumulations in many areas, especially east of Galena, could be around 6 to 12 inches of snow. And this is going to go all the way through midday Tuesday into Wednesday morning. So plan on getting some snow. And that includes you in Fairbanks, Fort Yukon, Bettles, southward toward Tanana, and westward toward Galena. Lighter accumulations of snow out here in the west, but again, that's going to start out with some freezing rain. Out in the west, high surf conditions are expected for the western tip of the Seward Peninsula and the St. Lawrence Island seacoast. You could be talking about breaking waves on the order of about 4 to 8 feet and storm surge of about 1 to 2 feet there. So watch for some additional coastal situations there in the western part of the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island, and that'll continue tonight and into tomorrow. So a lot going on not only in the interior, South Central, but still going on in Southeast as well. The folks that seem to be left out of the mix are in the Aleutians, but you're getting plenty of wind and some rain, snow out in Shemya already, all because of this low pressure system sitting here across the southern Bering Sea. You can see it's tapped into moisture, and that's working itself northward up the western coast. We'll look out a little bit further west, shows another area of low pressure coming off of eastern Asia, and as that progresses eastward, it's going to continue our unsettled pattern well into this week and probably into next week with more waves out behind that. So a very active period right now, especially for the southern 2/3 of Alaska and for southeast. As you look at southeast Alaska today, you can see the clouds working their way northward as we get into the latter part of the afternoon. Still looking at some of the snow falling across northern sections of southeast. The winter weather advisory continues for you. South central warmer air is working northward. As a result of that overrunning some of the colder air trapped at the surface, we've set up the situation for freezing rain. So everything starts as snow in this case, but as it melts, it falls down and hits cold surfaces and then refreezes. And that freezing rain setup is what's going to create some slippery travel and probably some light accumulations of ice on cold surfaces. That could be your car, that could be the sidewalk if it's exposed. Metal surfaces are always a good bet, and trees and power lines again in south central. Out in the west, watch for that to hit the power lines and anything that's cold and elevated up above the surface. It stands a good chance of collecting some of that ice accumulation first. But remember, a lot of what's going to happen during the day tomorrow is a lot of that moisture is going to quickly turn into snow from west to east as that stretches up across the Yukon Valley and into the interior around the Cook Valley and into the middle Tanana Valley. So a lot of folks are going to get in on the opportunity for good amounts of snow, in some cases as much as 6 to 12 inches of snow. Here's the weather map. Warmer air is represented by our red line here. The little half circles show the direction of movement, so the warmer air is lifting toward the northern Gulf Coast and also passing through southeastern Alaska with high pressure up across the southern Yukon at 1,022 millibars. We've had some rounds of snow across south central and Prince William Sound today. Cordova earlier this afternoon was reporting freezing rain. Snow showers continue across the lower Kuskokwim and the lower Yukon Valley with some light rain around Bristol Bay. Colder air is working in behind that, so as we go ahead into tonight, warm air quickly lifts northward up to the Alaska Range or so. Southern areas, especially the lower terrain, will be dealing with freezing rain, and some of that again could approach to about 1 to 2/10 of an inch. Coastal areas definitely looking at rainfall, and then you'll see kind of a mix from time to time up around southeast with a better chance for heavier snow to slowly develop from west to east and north of that warm front into the interior along the Yukon Valley and into the western sections of the Yukon Territory itself. Low pressure around the Norton Sound region and just south at 987 millibars is also bringing that moisture around to the Pribilofs, St. Lawrence Island, and points southward. Could be looking at some pockets of freezing rain there across the southern sections of the Bering, but quickly that turns back into rain tomorrow as that overrunning situation comes to an end. 983 millibar low there around Atka, slowly working itself eastward, but you'll notice that deep southwesterly flow working its way into the northern Gulf Coast. Periods of moderate to occasionally heavy rain for southern parts of southeast, a better chance for snow around Juneau, Haines, and the Chilkat Valley. Northward into the Chugach Range, you're looking at periods of snow during the morning hours tomorrow into the midday, and then that should quickly wind down just as quickly as it begins. Northward along the interior from the Alcan all the way out toward Norton Sound, you're looking at moderate to occasionally heavy rain. That's the winter storm warning that's in effect through the daytime tomorrow and into Wednesday morning. There will be some snow just offshore of the Chukchi Seacoast. A lot of that will stay focused on eastern Siberia with low pressure just off the coast of Point Hope and Point Lay. Colder air is dropping southward, and as we get into Wednesday, that really starts to fall apart as that leading edge of colder air mixes in with some of the warmer air hovering across the southern Bering Sea. Watch for periods of rain and drizzle to continue for points north of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Another wave of low pressure is working in across the North Pacific, and this will hover just south of Adak and Atka and running into areas of low pressure across the Gulf. We should see the winds turn to more of a south and easterly direction, continuing that flow of light rain into the Prince William Sound and Cook Inlet regions, and probably continuing snow showers for many along the south central roadways, the Chugach, Sterling, into the Prince William Sound region. High pressure sitting across Whitehorse, about 1,018 millibars or so, probably putting in fog around Copper River Basin. Southeast should start to break up with a little bit of clearing closer to the coastal areas. Watch for some fog across the region as high pressure slowly gaining control of that region. And we'll continue to see some snow across the YK Delta all the way into Galena, north of Ruby, out toward Kotzebue Sound, and probably up towards Stebbins or so, with showers of snow around the Bering Strait region. Trough of low pressure extends up into the Chukchi Seacoast. That may keep some breezes going around the Chukchi Seacoast there from Barrow westward, and areas of fog should be expected around Kaktovik to Prudhoe Bay, especially offshore. That's a quick check of what's going on around Alaska for the next couple days. As we check on today's temperatures, you'll notice most areas in southeast were in the 20s and 30s. A few places north, like Juneau, hovered in the teens for a good chunk of the afternoon. 20s and 30s for most of south central. Anchorage was only 21, about the same there for Squinta and Talkeetna today. Single digits and low teens for most of the middle Tanana Valley. Eagle, about 5 above. Northway was 5 below. Most of the Yukon saw some bitterly cold temperatures from 4 to about 15 below. 6 below in Fort Yukon, 24 below for Arctic Village. The Arctic coast anywhere from 5 to 10 below. Kotzebue Sound saw temps in the single digits, teens, and low 20s. 30 in Nome this afternoon. Unalakleet was 30 degrees. Galena was showing about 21. And westward toward Tanana, it was 13 degrees. McGrath was 24. Bethel was only 38. Nunivak Island 39. Bristol Bay saw temps in the 30s and 40s. Most of the Alaska Peninsula followed suit, with Sandpoint close to 40 degrees. False Pass and Cold Bay were also in the mid-30s. The Pribilofs in the mid to upper 30s. 36 in Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, and low to mid-30s for the west and central parts of the chain. As you see, temperatures around Kodiak tonight will drop to about 36. Southeast looking at temps in the mid to upper 20s. The interior expecting lows in the single digits. Most areas north of the Yukon will drop into the 10 to about 25 below range, with the coldest weather around the Yukon Flats. Barrow 10 below. Nome about 23 above. The southwestern coast in the low to mid 30s. The chain probably in the mid to upper 30s. Kodiak 36 to 42 by the end of the day tomorrow. Upper 30s and lower 40s for southeast. South central looking at temps at or just above freezing. That'll likely happen in the first part of the day, and that's the problem we're talking about with the freezing rain. After the colder air rushes in, everything turns back to snow and temperatures begin to fall again. And as soon as that happens, you'll notice that quick changeover in precipitation type. 16 around Fairbanks tomorrow afternoon, 1 above in Fort Yukon, 5 to about 10 below for the Beaufort Seacoast, and 5 below to about 12 above for the Chukchi Seacoast. Kotzebue Sound temperatures, like Kotzebue itself, should hover in the single digits, about 5 above there. 24 in Nome and southwestern coast in the low to mid 30s, with Bristol Bay temperatures, including king salmon, about 38, with temps at or above 40 degrees for most of the chain. Flying weather tomorrow is going to be rough across the Yukon Valley. You can see hit and miss IFR conditions, but remember, we're talking about a pretty good band of moderate to heavy snow developing, and west of that, it's probably going to begin as freezing rain, especially tonight. So not only will you have poor flying weather to fly through, but the visibility is not going to be very good, if at all, throughout the day. IFR conditions expected from Prince William Sound to the northern parts of the Gulf Coast and into the Juneau region during the afternoon tomorrow, along a good chunk of the northern and western sections of the passes on the Alaska Range and around the southwestern hills and mountains there. Also from St. Matthew and points west. Otherwise, MVFR through most of the coastal areas around the Gulf, the western seacoast, and well, probably the Beaufort Seacoast, looking at MVFR. Let's check your passes though. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, probably okay for most of the daytime tomorrow. Everything else is going to have some trouble. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, IFR conditions are expected throughout the daytime tomorrow. Rainy Pass, likely looking at IFR conditions through most of your Tuesday, as is Windy Pass and Isabel Pass. As we get into Mentasta Pass, we'll see some changes there during the day. VFR to start, and then heading over toward MVFR. That may be questionable. It'd be lucky if it stays VFR through most of the day, and there's a chance that could happen, but I've erred on the side of caution here, showing you MVFR. Tanita Pass likely starts out at IFR with some marginal improvements during the day, so keep your eyes on that if you can get through Tanita that way. Portage Pass, MVFR conditions through most of the day. You might have some IFR conditions in the morning, and then if snow sets in, that'll change back to IFR late in the afternoon. Chilkoot and White Pass, IFR conditions to start with some improvement expected during the afternoon, so maybe MVFR. We've got warm air aloft trying to nose up and over the surface freezing line tomorrow morning. That's the reason we're talking about freezing rain for south central. Southeast, you can see the surface freezing line and the warmer air aloft just right on top of each other here. This will drop southward slowly after low pressure passes. And we have a bubble of warmer air out there across the central Bering. Most places, though, in the interior and for southwestern Alaska, generally at or just above freezing there. Now, across the Yukon Valley, you can see light to isolated moderate and a large area of occasional moderate icing potential across the middle and upper Yukon Valley. We were just discussing this late this afternoon. Really, a lot of Alaska has a very large icing threat tomorrow. South Central is going to be difficult to fly in tomorrow morning with the threat for freezing rain there. And for southwestern Alaska, generally from Bethel and points northward into the Norton Sound region, watch for freezing rain, especially in the morning, but that threat's going to continue throughout the day, especially from the surface to at least 2,000 feet and then even more so above 2,000 feet. So lots of issues of flying tomorrow in the west and the interior. The jet stream shows several circulations, low pressure across the Alaska Peninsula and across the North Slope. This is allowing that cold air to drop southward, but not immediately so. It gets kind of shunted off to the north and into the western territories. And we also have warmer air working into the Gulf thanks to the low pressure system across the southwestern part of the Alaska Peninsula. So a whole lot going on here and a whole lot making the weather situation not quite perfectly winter. At 9,000 feet, a broad southwesterly flow moving over the Gulf with wind speeds picking up as they cross over southeast. Low pressure in the north guiding a northerly flow down the Bering Strait, and another wave of low pressure really stirring up the winds out in the western chain, 50 to 60 knots there, with storm force winds out in the western Bering already tonight. 3,000 feet, you can see our trough stretching from northwestern Alaska all the way down into the central chain. Our southwesterly flow being met up with slower winds around high pressure near Haida Gwaii, and northeasterlies coming down through the Bering Strait around 30 to 40 knots. So turbulence, there is going to be some tomorrow, especially from Kodiak Island southward into the western Gulf, below about 4,000 feet or so. Some of that could reach occasional widespread moderate, light to isolated moderate across the Bering Strait. Probably your most crucial issue tomorrow will be visibility and the icing potential across a great many places in the west, south central, and northern parts of southeast. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes after a few words from Harry.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to Hangar Flying. This is the third of 3 programs that I taped to bring to you the angle of attack and angle of attack indication system. I feel so strongly about this, I've kind of changed the format, and I wanted to talk to you directly about it. The first session we talked about the theory behind angle of attack and critical angle of attack. Last time we talked about how you could use it for everything from VX and VY. We talked about best glide, and I would argue before we leave that point that if you lose an engine, you may or may not even remember what the POH says about best glide. For my 185, it's 73 knots. But guess what? That is only good for one set of circumstances. And it can be 8 knots different than that, 8 knots slower than that, if you're at minimum gross weight. So when you're doing a engine out landing, you don't need to be thinking about that. With the AOA gauge, all you have to do is know what the symbology is for that. And let me just show you what that would look like. All you have to do is situate the airplane to show you that angle of attack, and that's your best glide regardless of airspeed. Tonight I want to wrap this up, and I want to tell you why it's really important. And it's not VX, VY, or best glide. It's going to save your life from that loss of control accident. As I've mentioned before, 40% of fatalities are loss of control. They can happen in moose stall. They can happen in the traffic pattern. Let me show you what can happen here. So we're in cruise flight, and let's say we spot a moose that we want to see if it's legal, if the antlers are big enough. So we're down at 250 feet. We don't have enough, quite frankly, if the airplane departs, we're not going to recover. You be flying your Super Cub, you may not have a stall warning. But if you've got angle of attack, let me show you what's going to happen. Okay, so you slow up. And so here you are about 88 knots, depending on your wing loading, which means depending on your G's. But you keep pulling back, okay? Now I told you that's about what I fly final at, so you're about 75 knots. Now you keep pulling back more and more, and you get that. Now you are at about 1.2 VS, well, stall speed. Again, you're not concentrating on airspeed. You're not concentrating what's going on in the airplane. You're looking outside that moose. So you want to tighten your turn so you don't lose sight of this animal. What happens when you tighten the turn? Your angle of attack increases. Now, this is where, this is probably 60 knots. you ever see red on this gauge, you ought to be pushing the yoke or stick forward and reducing your angle of attack now, right? You ought to be briefing your passenger, whoever's riding with you. If you ever see this red on this gauge, poke me and say, Harry, your angle of attack is getting too high. But let's see what happens if you ignore this. This can happen in the traffic pattern. How many accidents have happened where you have to make a last-minute go-around, you add the power, the nose comes up, the angle of attack increases. Watch what happens. Now you've got an oral indication that you are getting to an area you do not want to be. You keep pulling back. You keep
Caution, too slow.
You keep pulling back.
Too slow, too slow.
All of this happens before you get any aerodynamic indications of a stall in your airplane. For example, if you've got a stall warning indicator, you have got all of this warning before that stall warning happens, before you get a stick shake or shudder or buffet or anything else. And shame on you if you haven't recovered before you ever get into that dangerous situation. You should have recovered long ago when you had the first indication you've exceeded what is known. In this case, this is the symbol for optimum angle of attack. When you start pulling back because you're on short final and you're not paying attention, or you're trying to track that moose, and you get up here into the red, and all of a sudden it's going to be blaring in your headset. And that's when you need to recover. Ladies and gentlemen, that's why I feel so strongly about this technology. It's, by airplane standards, not that expensive, and you can have it put in your airplane, and it very well may save your life and the lives of the passengers with you. So if you have any questions, please contact me. If you purchase one of these and you want some ideas on how to calibrate it, please let me know. Send me an email at the Safety Foundation. Give me a call. I'd love to talk to you more about this, but I've got to tell you, I think this is a game changer. We may be able to cut that fatal and serious injury accident rate in Alaska in half, if not get rid of it altogether. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this has been helpful. I really believe in this technology, and until next time, fly safe.
Thanks, Harry. Now a quick check of the sea ice edge. You can always find this at weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. The sea ice here colored in blue, filling in for Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound and making a run in between Nunivak Island and the southwestern coastline. With southerly flow, some of this may still be a little bit unstable. Keep your eyes on this for a lot of changes, because as soon as the winds settle down and high pressure moves in, a lot of this is going to freeze over very quickly. Moving on to southeast now for Tuesday, look for an onshore flow from the south and west around 20 to 25 knots. Seas running between 7 and about 12 feet to the north, and across the inner waterways 2 to 5 feet, with the strongest winds from the Stevens Passage area down into the Clarence Strait around 4 feet there, with the southeast wind at 20 knots. By Wednesday, the winds diminish somewhat, and you can see the flow becomes a little more variable as we get into the midweek. Winds will go light around 5 to 10 knots or so. In the Lynn Canal, they could be variable. In the north end, more of a southeasterly flow along the coast, and a light onshore flow, if not southerly, parallel to the coastline near Craig and the Dixon entrance around 10 knots or so, with seas running around 10 to 11, maybe even 12 feet in the northern entrances. For south central, look for an easterly flow inside of Prince William Sound up to 25 knots with 6-foot seas. Southwesterlies coming over Kodiak Island and over the Barren Islands between 25 and 30 knots. Seas between 9 and about 15 feet there. Inside of Cook Inlet, 25 knots with 7 to 8-foot seas, and 25 to 30 knot winds in the northern Gulf. Seas running around 12 feet or so by Tuesday. You'll see the winds turn a little bit more to the south and east as we get into Wednesday. Northerlies kick back in across the northern Cook Inlet. Still no ice to be seen there. Easterly flows south of Kenai all the way down to the Shelikof Strait, running around 15 knots from the east and southeast, and southerlies outside of Prince William Sound, 20 knots with an 11-foot sea there on Wednesday. For the Alaskan Peninsula, 25 to 30 knot winds there on the Bering Sea side. Inside Bristol Bay, 15-foot seas, 17 to 19-foot seas in the North Pacific, with southwesterlies up to 30 knots. And by Wednesday, a big change. You'll notice more of an easterly flow developing. Winds become variable and light around 10 knots with 4-foot seas north of Cold Bay and 10-foot seas in the North Pacific, all the way from Castle Cape down toward False Pass and Cape Sarachef. As we get into Tuesday for the Aleutians, much stronger winds from Atka all the way out toward Kiska and Attu. 40 to 45 knot winds are expected, with seas running between 23, 26, even 27 feet there by Tuesday, with some of the strongest winds north of Kiska and Attu. Some of those already storm force, and storm warnings are in effect at this point. 25 to 30 knot winds for the eastern and central chain. You can see winds rapidly lay down as we get into Wednesday. 10 to 15 knots on the Bering side, 15 to 20 on the North Pacific side. 9 to 13 foot seas are expected there. Seas still running around 12 to 13 feet in the Bering, and 10 to 11 foot seas there, with more of an east and northeasterly component as we get into Wednesday afternoon from Kiska to Attu in the Bering. Now across the west, freezing spray is going to be an issue up and down, very close to the ice edge, and again that extends down toward Nunivak Island. Now northeasterly is a little bit stronger around St. Lawrence Island, 20 to 30 knots closer to the coast, a little bit further south there. Southerlies are coming into the Kuskokwim Bay. Light northeasterly winds to St. Matthew, and they become variable around St. Paul, the Pribilofs. Northeasterlies start to diminish as we get into Wednesday, 20 knots there, 15 knots outside of the Kuskokwim Bay, and northerlies for the Pribilofs with a 9-foot sea on Wednesday. For the north coast, look for easterlies on the Beaufort Seacoast, westerlies north of Barrow, and northerlies running down through the Chukchi Seacoast with freezing spray again close to the ice edge. Winds are a little bit stronger there, 25 to 30 knots. They pick up even more as we get into Wednesday, 35 knots there just west of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, with freezing spray still a threat. And easterlies continue around the Beaufort Seacoast at 25 knots, more of a northeasterly flow just offshore of Barrow. Once again, winter weather advisories continue for the northern parts of southeastern Alaska. Freezing rain advisories for south central Alaska until tomorrow morning, and that could end with some more snow during the daytime tomorrow. Winter weather, or winter storm warnings, I should say, from the west coast all the way through the Yukon Valley, including the middle Tanana Valley in the Fairbanks region. Freezing rain could accumulate from about 1 to 2 tenths there in the west, and then gradually shift over to more of a moderate to occasionally heavy snow, which could lead some in the interior to see 6 to 12 inches of snow by the time it's all said and done on Wednesday. That's your Alaska weather. Enjoy it. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.